hang on. So that was a good start, wasn't it? Things going off on my head. Good evening. Hello, everybody. Welcome to An Evening With. I'm Triangle Face, and I'm joined with Ollie. And this evening, we are having an evening with Simon Phipps. Hello, Simon.
Hi, guys. Hi, guys.
Thanks very much for joining us. How are you?
No, you're welcome. Great. Thank you very much. Yes, no, retired and busier than ever now. Yes, I'm still contributing to a game with my previous employer, Three Fields Entertainment, doing a few hours a week and stuff for them to help them with the game. But yeah, pursuing all sorts of different projects. And I'm sort of, since January, my feet haven't touched the ground. I've been doing so many different things. So really quite happy and able to finally concentrate a lot on my health and stuff and fitness and things, which is a big kind of motivator for me. So no, going good.
Yeah, excellent. No, it's great. We did get a chance to catch your sort of speech at the Nottingham Video Games Expo earlier in the year. And when I was listening, I thought, you've had a really good career in gaming and have worked loads of industry titles, and yeah, really wanted to get you on to have a chat. So thanks very much for coming back to us.
You're welcome.
Should we say hello to a few people in the chat, Ali?
Indeed, we have got.
You do the buttons.
There we go. We've got Mr. Dave Newland. Good evening, David.
Hi, David.
Great to see you. We have got the man, the myth, and the legend, Rob Taylor. Wonderful to see you, Rob. We've got Ryan. Nice to see you, Ryan. Hope you're good. We've got Vernon Couchman in the chat as well. And there's definitely a couple of people lurking as well. So as people start throwing in some comments, we'll get them on.
And if you've got any questions for Simon, please chuck them in the chat. And towards the end, we'll go through any styled questions. So any questions you've got for Simon throughout the evening, please do put them in the chat for us.
Definitely.
And yeah, we'll start with one of the first questions we tend to ask all of our guests is just early gaming memories for yourself. So before you actually got into the gaming industry and working on games, what actually interested you in games to begin with? And what were some of the first consoles you got your hands on?
Wow. I suppose first video game I can remember is one of those kind of 1970s little Pong type things that my cousin had on a TV, probably as far back as I can remember. Then it was Space Invaders at the swimming baths, so kind of thing, sticking a 10p in, playing that. And then I'm an artist. I've always wanted to make cartoons, get my images on screen and get them all moving about. So I was kind of obsessed with kind of filmmaking as a kid. And I really wanted, one of the things I really wanted was an 8mm cine camera. So I could actually, make my own cartoons, because there was programs on the 1970s called Screen Test where kids would make their own films and submit them to the BBC. Back in 74, there's a TV program called Bob Godfrey's Film Animation Show or something like that, where he basically showed you how you could make your own movies. And there was like an episode with Terry Gilliam on showing how to use cutout animation. He was the guy that created Bob Godfrey was the guy that created the Rhubarb cartoons. You remember those kind of thing with the squiggly markers? And I was just like, I want to make this stuff. Never got a film camera, but I also got kind of like, and as artistically as arty as I am, thank you very much, David. As arty as I am, I've also got a maths and logic bent, so I kind of have these two things. So I was round at my friend Philip Basker's in 1981, and so that would make me 15. And one of the things he wanted to show me, as him and his dad had bought a kit of a ZX81 1K from an electronics magazine and put it together themselves. So it was a load of soldering and all this kind of stuff. And he pulls it up, and it was a version of Space Invaders, all alphanumeric characters in 1K. When you press the key to update the screen or whatever, it flashed to static to refresh it or and stuff. And the little invaders, the little asterisks and H's and things like that moved around. I was like, Phil, this is like putting pictures on screens and moving around. Can I change what the invaders are? And it's like, well, you can kind of change it. It could be an A, it could be a H, it could be a W. I'm like, you're still doing it. So from that point on, it was like, I want a computer because I can then put animations on screen. So I've got a paper round at the time, and I really wanted an Acorn Electron, which was kind of like the kind of color computer that was kicking around. And the BBC Micro was just about to come out the following year. My parents said, well, you can have one of those, but, you know, you take your savings, we'll add to it, and you can have one of those new BBC computers. So actually, May 1982, for my birthday, it just sort of coincided with the release of these things. I got a BBC Model A computer and sat down with it and like, right, brilliant. I can start drawing things on screen and whatever. And how do you do that? Well, you start writing BASIC and start drawing lines and things. I think I may have had like a little art package somewhere or other but just started tinkering with it and drawing kind of vector lines and things like that. And then, and then kind of what came out of that was like, well, okay, I'm starting to play games in the arcades at that time. So by that point, you got things like Donkey Kong and more colorful games and things. So, and Pac-Man. So it was like, okay, I'll write my own versions of those. So in BASIC, using all the character display stuff, which was just sort of like using single colors per character. I just started writing my own little version of Pac-Man, my own version of Invaders, those kind of things. And I got to a certain point where doing multicolor sprites was really, really hard, because you couldn't just sort of go use the internals of the BASIC, create a user-defined character and just plot it in any color. You had to actually fiddle around with the screen memory. So the great thing about the BBC Micro was it had, within its BASIC, you could actually embed assembler machine code. And so I kind of figured out how to, with the help of a few bits of manuals and fiddling around for hours, actually plot multicolored sprites on the screen. So I ended up with a situation where I could now make a game that looked the sort of things like they were in the arcades. And I got a friend of mine, Stuart Gregg, who went on to work with me in the games industry in some of the early titles. He used to come around of an evening, because I was the kid with the computer and we hit it off and good friends. And so what would happen is it'd be sort of sitting around, I'm working on something or other, we're chatting, and then it'd be a few games of Chucky Egg. That was kind of like our go-to sort of platform game. And I'd done several of these little games. I'd also cottoned on at that point that magazines published listings, as they did in the day. So I started submitting some of my little BASIC games that I'd written to magazines. And when they started coming back and going, we'll pay you 50 quid a page, I was like, So if I do some drawings and write some text and write a bit about how I actually did the listing, I'm going to get more pages and more cash. So I sort of did that.
Yeah.
And so actually ended up making, in some of those early BBC Micro user and stuff like that kind of thing. There's a few listings that I got in there and did little illustrations for and stuff. And at the same time, also, by that point, I was working spare time in a computer shop, First Byte Computers in Derby, which now is under Marks and Spencer's when they leveled part of the city and kind of built a huge shopping centre. So yeah, my Saturdays were going into First Byte, working and selling these computers and stuff, and then in my evenings making this stuff away. Anyway, one evening, Stu saw what I was working on, which was a elite status on the BBC Micro as well. OG. So I'm quite happy with that one, looking at little tiny white dots for hours and hours and hours. So anyway, I was working on this little jetpack game, because by that point Jetpack had come out for the Spectrum. I was like, hey, there's like a game with a jetpack in. I will make a game with a jetpack, with a little guy flying from one side of the screen to the other, picking up fuel cans and dropping off to little waiting spaceships. And Stu at one point said, why don't you send this into a publisher? I was like, get out of there. It's just me mucking around with BASIC. But no, I'm sure somebody. So I put it on a tape and sent it to ANF Software and Micropower. ANF Software wrote a very polite letter turning me down because they wanted games that were 100% machine code, because copy protection and all this kind of thing. So I was like, okay. Micropower came back and said, we'd love to publish it. We have a list of 10 things we'd suggest. I think one of them was to reduce the number of levels and make them, kind of, rather than being the ideas all spread out, bring them all together and make them more interesting. Add a high score table, a few bits and pieces like that. And so I was like, okay, so I did that, send it off to them, and they published it. And suddenly I'm at school, aged about 17, with a game in the charts for the BBC Micro.
Wow, that's incredible.
So that was kind of cool. Meant that I absolutely messed up my A levels, because I was more into kind of computers and girls than I was math, science, and chemistry. Maths, physics, and chemistry, which I'm an artist, and like the last thing I did was art, because that wasn't a proper subject at the time. So I discovered computers and girls, and that was my A levels out the window.
It's like at that time, I suppose you got the thing of the technology you're working with and what's available, what you can make is quite limited. But then also, like, it's really new still, so there's not many games that have done anything yet. So there's a lot of original ideas that people come up with and things like that in that time, because no one had done it yet. It seems like, okay, we can kind of do whatever we want, but also you can only get it to work with the limitations of what we've got to work with at the moment.
Exactly.
But going back now, even now, we actually play a BBC Micro game on one of our shows once a month, which was probably what might not be the first game I ever played, but it's the first game I remember playing, a game called Tanks. And you literally just enter a number for the angle of the cannon, and then you enter the number for the velocity of the shot, and you just take it in turns, like a very basic
calculating little parabolic arcs.
And that's still fun to play today. I rediscovered there's a game that I absolutely loved in the BBC Micro, and I didn't know what it's called, because I don't know what happened to all the cassettes. I think my parents probably got rid of a lot of them. So it's like, I remember these games, but I have no idea what they were called to go and look them up. But I finally found one. It's called Cybertron Mission. And it's just one where you walk around a maze, but if you touch the wall, you get electrocuted and you die. And if you spend too long in a room, a ghost comes and gets you.
It's like a version of Berserk, isn't it?
And you have to get around. And the controls, for some reason, the controls on the keyboard are just not where you would expect them to be. So every now and then you're like, right, I've got to go to the right, and you go up, and then you electrocute yourself on a wall.
So that whole sort of thing of like X and comma and dot and things like that kind of thing is like. I know exactly where you're coming from with that one.
But it's great to go back and see like some of those games on the BBC Micro that, like I said, still hold up now. The other one I remember though, there was a Doctor Who game we had, and it was a very cool looking box art. And I was like, I really want to play this game. And when you play the game, it's just a bunch of squiggly lines on the screen that were meant to be worms or something. And I had no idea what I was supposed to do, and it was dreadful. And then I'd forget about it. And every now and then, I'd go through the box and be like, this game looks so good. It's got to be good. I'll give it another try. And every time I put it in, I was like, no, it's just a bunch of squiggly lines on the screen. I've got no idea what's going on.
Yeah, it's one of those kind of ones I've learned over the years as well. That whole thing of, well, I've got so many decades now of gaming under my belt. I'll be able to go back and no. It's as punishing and evil as it ever was.
I still think though that certainly going back, maybe not quite up to sort of like Super Nintendo era, because my first era of gaming was sort of the NES, which is still 80s. And I still find going back to some of those games, anything that had a slight limitation, and you find it in certainly in like independent cinema as well, something that's got a little bit of limitation actually boosts the most creativity, because you kind of well, I can't do everything I want to do, so what can I do within the confines of what I have?
Absolutely.
And that's where you find the greatest art, or the things that that stand the test of time. This is why probably things like Super Mario the original one is still beloved, because it's fairly simple, but it's great.
It's funny to say about like film. You get films of like a low budget and things like that.
Yeah,
and I always kind of go back to. It's a shame everything is CGI now. So go back and watch old movies from like the 80s. It's like I love practical effects in films. Like practical effects.
We're
always look so cool. When even if it just looks like
we sat down the other night and did a double bill of The Thing and American Werewolf, and like Rob Bottin and Rick Baker. You're just sitting there watching it and just going, this is all done in camera, and the amount of work and sculpting for every single individual shot just to pull up fantastic. And you're right, it is that kind of crazy thing where we live in a world where you could go, and this is kind of one of those sort of ones where you sort of temper the technology. Back then you had no technology, and you were kind of taking these little slices of interactivity and going, this is kind of the football game or the adventure, or one day maybe if I could like do the equivalent of D&D or something like that on a computer, and it's like with whatever limitation there was, now we can literally do all of that, and it's quite astonishing. It's also kind of weird how you can get habituated to it, and then you can be kind of going, any single one of these games that sits there on my Steam Deck would have made my head fall off when I was 16. Yeah. And now I'm going, well, I'm not so sure about that one. Graphics aren't quite good. Oh, the frame rate dropping.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Oh, okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love it with I will let move on to other things, but just because it's a perfect example, I think, of how something independent is just annihilating everything else out there at the moment, and it is movie related. I'm a big horror fan, and I really like the Terrifier franchise.
Oh yes, yeah.
So Terrifier 2 was incredible for what it is. It's an absolute gore fest, but it's all practical, and it's got a budget of about 50p. But he spends the budget so well, so much so that the new one that's at the cinema now, which I still can't believe it's actually got a theatrical release, has an incredibly low budget, but it is the #1 movie in America right now because it's just so much fun. And people are just flocking to it. And you just, a movie that was made for $1 million just over, which was considered big, is...
Well, I think it was one of those kind of things this the other day, actually talking about, just going on this, I heard the fact that the catering and transport budget for the Disney Plus series, The Acolyte, was 32 million. So you could make 16 Terrifier 3s for just what they spent on cake and hotels.
Wow.
That's just bizarre, right? It's
wow. I will say it is what Godzilla -1, my favorite film of the
that was great. Yeah.
15 million, something. It's like amazing, and say I kind of appreciate that, because for the past 10, well, nearly 11 years working with Three Fields, we've it's been 7 of us making games in Unreal and just using really smart tools, having an approach to like, okay, then there's only 7 of us. How are we going to do this but still deliver something that sells at a reasonable amount of price? I've got to go into a load of fun gameplay and things. And when you get into the world of bloated, big budget blockbuster stuff, which I've also had the opportunity to work on and the privilege to work on over the years, it is a kind of different mindset, because you are steering this gigantic juggernaut. And for me, it was really kind of cool to start small, go and experience all of that, and then come back to a very small team where we're just making the decisions between ourselves and working as lean as possible. So it is kind of really nice to have had this big arc as I go through.
We'll say good evening to Blunners, who's just joined us.
Straight from football training, I'm here.
And that will segue us nicely onto the next topic of actually getting started in the games industry. So you sort of talked about actually getting some games submitted. Which, again, at the age you were at the time, it's been really exciting to actually get something like that into magazines and things. So what was then your first sort of proper job in games industry then?
Right. So what I did was, having messed up my A-level spectacularly, I was kind of like, I wanted to do computer science, computer studies, or something or other. So I put out a load of requests to various different universities, and I went round to them. They all sounded a bit dull, but I did have a little backstop, which would be Trent Polytechnic in my home city of Nottingham. And the thing with Trent, it's now Nottingham Trent University. I went along, and everybody was lovely who interviewed me. They had tea and biscuits and everything, and they were really nice. And they had a really low bar for entry. So I went in there to do HND Computer Studies, which was like a sandwich course. So you did a year of academic stuff. You went and did a year in industry and came back another year. So the cool thing was, with the Polytechnic, all of the lecturers had worked in industry. So there were guys who'd been, done 10 years working for ICI, going, this is how the big computer systems in ICI work and everything. So you had this kind of like huge, like year-long documentary in how to do stuff. And then the occasionally, certainly, was one of my favorite electric guy again, Dermot, who said, right, okay, we're gonna this is your operating systems course. Build me an operating system now. I'll see you in 10 weeks. And it was one of those kind of things. You just got into groups of 3 and wrote an operating system. But it was brilliant, because it was like he could have stood in front of a board for 10 weeks just going like that. This was find out and figure it out and everything. And it was more about going through the work. Whether it worked or not at the end, it didn't matter, but you put the effort in and everything. So I always remember that. So anyway, I had a year doing that. I came to the end of my first year, and Dermot actually was also my careers teacher. It was like, well, actually, your coding is really good. We have got the offer to go and work at IBM for your placement. It's like, but it's not in a programming position. It's actually in the marketing department of the Nottingham IBM. Well, back then, working for IBM was like being asked to work at Google or Meta or something like that kind of thing. So I was like, go on then. So put a suit on, went to their offices there, and then spent a whole year working in kind of an office environment, supporting all the sales team. Mainly, it was the marketing department, marketing programs department. So it was this sort of thing of they were putting on kind of customer events where they'd have a load of PCs, salesmen, demonstrating the latest software and everything. So I so I spent spent a year in an office pulling apart PCs, putting boards in and everything like that, writing newsletters, ordering catering, making sure stuff turned up and everything. It was really fun work to do, and the people I worked with were really lovely. Came to the end of it and they were like, do you want to stay with us? I was like, well, no, it's all right. I don't fancy working for a big American corporation, but appreciate it. That's a throw forward. So anyway, went back, did my final year. During that year, met my now wife, Jane, who's been married to me since 1989, in a nightclub. We hit it off and got together. And during the 2 academic years, I actually carried on working on my Saturdays in my Saturday job in First Byte Computers. So selling, various different machines. By the final year, I'd gone up to an Atari ST. I'd had an Amstrad CPC 464 for a while. Got a cartridge called Maxam, which allowed you to do with the Amstrad what you could do with the BBC Micro, which was to write BASIC and then insert, and in that case, Z80. Code into the basics, so I kind of followed the same thing, but I just couldn't get anything started. So I finished my college course and was like, right, now what? So I'll go into the world of sensible business computing, I suppose. So I cast around for a load of jobs, and I was like, well, I want to do something that's kind of graphical. And I actually found a job at a little company called Lasermaker, which is actually down in my hometown, Long Eaton, which is just about 8 miles outside of Nottingham. And this was working in a little tiny group of about 4 coders. And what Lasermaker did was they had a PC solution for driving gigantic typesetting machines in the newspaper industry. So at that time, when you wanted to kern fonts and set up pages, you had to have this dedicated terminal that was like 20 grand or something like that kind of thing that came with the machine. And the guy who founded this company went, you can get a PC, we'll write the software, and we can undercut that to the tune of, several tens of thousands of pounds. So they had this kind of command line based thing where you could input text, set all the kerning, leading, and all that kind of stuff that we never touch in a word processor and get that up. And when they hired me, Ventura Publisher had just come out for the Mac. So all eyes were on this whole, what you see is what you get WYSIWYG, where it was like you have an interface where you're actually laying out on screen what you're going to see on the printer. So I was tasked with, hi fella, it was I was tasked with coming up with the graphical interface for this this command line thing. So I started working, and I can distinctly remember having a conversation one afternoon with the two programmers, and we were trying to work out what you could do with mouse buttons, because this was the time before even the right click existed or double clicking.
Wow.
And we're going, well, could you hold that? Maybe if you press that with a key and all this kind of thing. And I think the only example that we had was Smalltalk on the Mac. which was kind of like this obscure object-oriented language that kind of like I never got my head around. So anyway, I'm working away there. By the way, the air conditioning was absolutely bloody freezing. So I'm kind of like in the middle of the July sitting there doing this. Stuff took so long to compile. I read the entire James Clavell Shogun over the course of about 2 weeks, whilst it was like, okay, then, one of those kind of things where you go, I'm going to touch 2 or 3 characters in a file which is shared from the whole code base, press a button, now I have to wait for it all to compile. Read. So it was tragically boring. There were no windows or whatever. And I'm about 4 or 5 months into this whole thing. And I get contacted by one of the guys that I knew at First Byte Computers. So there was a gang of guys that used to come to First Byte, regulars, one of whom actually ended up working there as, I think he became shop manager as well. So a bunch of guys, Rob Toon, Chris Wrigley, Andy Green, Terry Lloyd. And over time, I think it was Rob, Chris, and Andy got together and somehow, using a monitor and typing in numbers in the Commodore Amiga, managed to make the Commodore 64 a game called Bounder, which they got published by Gremlin Graphics. Literally, they were hand coding rather than actually using an assembler. It was like work out the machine code and then translate that into numbers, put it in and run it. And they managed to get an entire game out. So they got hired by Gremlin. Terry, who was working at the shop, was always interested in drawing graphics on the computer. He got hired. So there was a little team of them that I knew that were working at Gremlin. I think they worked initially in Gremlin Sheffield offices. And because Sheffield is some like 45 minutes up the road from where we are, it made sense for them to have a small office in Derby, which was where they all came from. And so Gremlin Derby was born. And one evening, I just get a call out of the blue from Terry Lloyd saying, "Hey, Simon, you still drawing stuff?" I was like, "Yeah, sort of thing." He said, "Well, I'm working on Masters of the Universe, the movie, the computer game, and I need some help on the art. Would you be up for it?" And I was like, "Okay," thinking I was just getting a little bit of a freelance gig. I had an Atari ST at the time. So I'll put together some bits and pieces. I quickly scurried around and drew some things using, I think it was probably Degar Elite at the time, the package, and using a mouse. Took a disc in to the office, met everybody there, met Kev Norman, who was one of the founders of Gremlin, and they turned around and offered me a job as a graphic artist working with them in Derby. I was like, "Wow, this is a pay cut, but I get to work in games." Now, working in games just didn't exist. Literally, it was not a thing.
Yeah.
So I can remember sitting in the dining room of my parents' house with Jane at that point, and I was like, "Well, what do you think?" He said, "Well, look, give it a go. If it lasts for 6 weeks or 6 months, you can always you're miserable where you are. You can always quit and go back to business computing." So I was like, "Okay, then." So yeah, I'm on. So I took the job with Gremlin as graphic artist in the office in Saxon House in Derby, and somehow or other, I never went back to business computing. I managed to kind of negotiate for the next years, going through all of these wild sorts of changes and seeing it all the way through. So that's kind of like how I got started in the games industry.
Yeah.
It's funny you mentioned the Master of the Universe. It's not. I don't think it's renowned as being a great movie, but I loved that as a kid. But that came. I don't know how old I would have been when I first saw that. I would have been quite young.
I literally went to the cinema to see it last year.
Yeah. Oh, did you?
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow,
They had a screening of it locally, and it was like, yeah, I'm going to see that.
Wow.
It is. It's a fun film. I did like it. It's. I do think it gets a bit of a bad rep, doesn't it? People kind of like to hate on that film a bit, but
it's charming. There's a fascinating. I was whether it's one of those the making ofs on Netflix or something or other. But there's a fascinating tale about how they ran out of time and money, and the final fight sequence with Frank Langella as Skeletor and Dolph Lundgren was filmed like in an afternoon as they're stripping down. I think they even broke into the studio or something like that to just get enough shots together to make the thing. I can remember turning up to the office, and they basically had the guys had been to see a rough cut of the movie at the cinema and kind of come out going, it's about this and it's about that. And then we just had a big stack of Polaroids of all of the characters. There's kind of like just that was obviously fired away on shots, was the on set and stuff. And so I just kind of turn up and I'm going, I don't know what this is, sort of thing, but it's something to do. Because I'm thinking it's Castle Grayskull, it's Eternia, it's what's in the cartoons. And it was like, so you want me to draw streets? And there's this, was it a co-character? I forget. Billy Barty played him, the little tiny troll kind of character. For the,
and then after the key thing, aren't they? Is that key?
Exactly, like, sort of thing. And it was like, okay, I'll just keep drawing away. I suppose actually this is quite kind of going into the story of this. I rapidly found that let's think, tools wise, I was using OCP Art Studio on the Atari because that was really good for sprite animations. Everybody had a copy of Degar Elite, which was great for big full screen stuff, and you could kind of hack animations by hitting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sort of thing on different screens to try and do it. But I discovered that OCP from, I think it was Rainbird, had this thing where you could create various different sizes of sprites and everything. So I started working in that. And then there were certain times where, because we were developing at that time the Amstrad, the Spectrum, Amiga and Atari ST and the Commodore 64, there would be calls to go onto those machines and use the art packages there to create the art. And I can remember at some point or other monkeying around with, I think it was on the Spectrum, with the rubber keys and the most god-awful art package, like pressing away. I was like, this is terrible. Why can't I draw the stuff on the Atari in black and white and then just port it over? So one of the things I had done was, because I was itching to get in and start coding, was about, I think it was probably like day 2 in the office. Went up to Andy Green, who was coding the Atari, and went like, Andy, I want to learn 68,000. I can do all the logic, but hardware, and this has always been my thing, hardware manuals just blow my mind. What do I need to do just so that I can just get on and start coding? He went, well, here you go. This is all I use. And there's literally about 12 lines of code, a few little trap statements that just switched off, like all of this sort of stuff, and basically turned the Atari into just like a big block of memory and just start writing. So what I then did was like, right, okay, then I will take in neochrome screens from OCP Art Studio, and then convert the data so I can just put out a file, and I never have to touch a rubber keyboard, a joystick on a Commodore 64 or whatever the hell it was on an Amstrad ever again. So I actually created all of the artwork from that point onwards. I'd just draw it in OCP Art Studio, do fat pixels on for the Amstrad and the Commodore 64, and then had my own little program. It was like, okay, then take this screen and spit out the data onto a disk, and I give it direct to the programmers. So I had kind of the best tools to develop it on, and then say I didn't have to mess around with any of these other sort of things. And that was my kind of way into coding. And so for the next year or so working at Gremlin, it was kind of like building up a set of utilities and writing and starting to fiddle around with code in my spare time to actually write a game. And then during the day, being a graphic artist.
Wow, there you go. No, since I'll do one. Well, I was going to mention one more thing about He-Man. I don't want to go off a tangent because you're going to talk He-Man. I was thinking of that movie. I can remember you mentioned a Netflix documentary, like behind the scenes stuff. There's a Netflix documentary about making toys. It's like different, like
successful yes, the toys.
I remember. I think my brother really had the He-Man toys because I think the He-Man toys were popular a little bit before I was sort of at that age, and then I kind of had all the hand-me-down He-Man toys. And the He-Man toys were always a lot bigger. They're quite chunky.
Yes,
and apparently. What they do with like toys, they make the toys at a bigger size and then they get shrunken down, and that's how they get a certain level of detail. So they're more detailed because they make them large and then they shrink them down. They look like a detailed
Yes.
figure. And when they had to demonstrate them or show them to the execs or whatever who needed to approve them, and they hadn't done that bit yet. And they're like, look, don't judge them yet. Like, we're going to make them look better. It's going to look like this. And they said, no, these are great. We want to keep them like this. Can you keep them this way? I want to have them big, all this size. And that's why the He-Man toys are bigger than like your traditional action figures, because they made them big. They never got as far as shrinking them. And then the people that wanted to sell them were like, nope, we like them big. Keep them this way.
Yeah, no, cool. Yeah, well, so you can see where my toys have gotten bigger now, because I was just mad on Star Wars, and now I kind of do the proper stuff. So.
I think so. When you get to the stage of life where you have the interests of a child but the finances of an adult, and you can buy your own toys,
and the access to the internet, which goes, this is how you make this stuff, which is just amazing. It's like really so cool. Like there is somebody out there who has built something that you're trying that you want to make and stuff. So it is that kind of thing. I kind of feel that I owe it to my 11-year-old self to go, you know what? Here you go.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more.
So we'll move on then to any sort of other things you've worked on. I know you've worked on loads of different titles. But,
wow.
So what are some of your favourite ones you've worked on?
Well, I suppose let's think. So the trajectory from Gremlin was to into core design. So let's think. So whilst I was working at Gremlin, I was working on things like Skate Crazy, doing some sprite graphics and some design, level design for that. Knight Raider, which was a kind of simulation game that Gremlin had bought in on PC from a Canadian team, and they needed a conversion to the Spectrum and Amstrad. So I think me and Dave Pridmore did that, and I spent a lot of time. Actually, I'm just going to pull up my website, simonphipps.com//games, so I can remember actually what I have worked on, because it is a terrifying amount. I actually put together a show reel for in advance of a talk I gave for Nottingham's Confetti College, and I was like, I'll just pull together some YouTube clips or whatever. I was like there for 2 days. It was shocking when you go, you underestimate. So yeah, worked on Master Universe, Skate Crazy, Knight Raider. I did a Mastertronic game in about a week with Rob Toon called Bionic Ninja, where he'd written the whole thing and went, I just need little men sliced away. So I did that. And in the background, I was working on the game that became Switchblade, which was on the Atari and the Amiga, a flick screen platformer that sort of like anime sort of inspired or whatever, well, manga, as we called it back then. And basically, whilst I was kind of like working as a graphic artist by day, I was sort of spending my evenings writing a full platform game. With that one, I remember seeing Underworld by Ultimate Play the Game and thinking, I really like the idea of this kind of multi-screen, flick screen adventure where you could just go for miles and stuff like that. So I set out to do that. So I wrote a map editor, did all these little sprites. They ended up being really, really cute little sprites, because I couldn't actually draw big, tall sprites on a flick screen because you just didn't have enough room to maneuver in. And I wasn't clever enough at that point to scroll the screen, certainly not on the Atari, because the Atari was just, you had memory, but you had no hardware to scroll the screen. So it was a really sort of chunky and intensive kind of thing to do. Writing Switchblade, and probably took about 18 months in the background. And then in my full-time job, Gremlin hit a cash flow crisis. And they were in this situation where they turned around and went, look, we like what you're doing, but we can't afford to run the office in Derby. So we'll offer you redundancy. You can either come up to Sheffield and work with us up north, which will mean like kind of like 2 or 3 hours a day on the M1 back in the 80s, commuting, up and, round trip kind of thing. It'd be an hour there and an hour back to Sheffield, or, take the cash. And we're like, well, don't really fancy going up to Sheffield. We'll take the cash. And at that point, two chaps, Kevin Norburn, who was one of the founders of Gremlin, their sales manager, a guy named Jeremy Smith, and actually our kind of lead programmer, guy we call Dad, Greg Holmes, that was in our office that worked with us. They got together and said, look, we want to form a company. Would you guys like to stay here, work in this office, but for us? And we're like, okay. So that's where Core Design was born, out of the sort of group of us in the old Gremlin offices. The name Core Design came from Jeremy going, I want something that sounds a bit like Rare. So that's where Core came from. And so we then started on, right, what are the games that we're going to start, developing? So one half of the office, that's Andy Green and those guys, ended up doing a conversion of Sega's Action Fighter on Master System for Atari and Amiga. And myself and Terry started putting together game pitches, one of which was Rick Dangerous, the game for which is a little Indiana Jones game, kind of based around little squishy sprites. It was basically me and Terry just sat down in an office one Tuesday afternoon, I think it was, just with big pieces of paper going, right, what's been done lately, which means that we can't do it. Oh yeah, Heimdall, absolutely, Jer and Jed, fantastic. And we just sort of sat down, what hasn't been done before, or at least lately. And I can remember Black Tiger by Capcom had been out in the arcades at that point, so that was Swords and Sorcery out of the what you mean? So anyway, Terry and I were kind of listing out various different things, and one of the ones we were like, actually, there's never been a really good sort of Indiana Jones like Raiders game, has there? There'd been, I think by that point, I think there are arcade games and there have been a couple of licensed games, but they never really felt like that kind of first 10 minutes of Raiders of the Lost Ark, where he's in the tomb, everything's out to get you, and there are all these traps and spikes and cool stuff. So it was like, well, we could do a platform game where you have all of the traps and everything. And Terry's like, well, how do we do that? And I was like, well, I reckon. And I kind of just put together in my head like a little tiny you basically, everything is a sprite. It can be lethal when it comes on the screen. It can be completely ignorable, so it's not there, or it can be a platform. And then you activate it with a trigger box that's somewhere on the screen. It then starts to move according to a movement table. It animates according to an animation table, and that's it. And from that, it was like, okay, then give me as many examples as you think of, Jerry, of what we want to do, from blow darts to spring traps to things that drop on your head or whatever. And this little kind of method sort of worked. And say the thing with Rick, we gave him kind of several things that can trigger off traps: his body, a stick that he could use to poke in holes, a bullet, which meant you could go and activate things at a distance, and then dynamite, which meant you could activate things after a period of time. And basically they would, if you put them in the trigger box and the trigger box was tagged to respond to it, it would do that. And so kind of just sort of sat there with these pieces of paper, wrote out what we could do. And there's actually some scans of that on my website. Basically it was like, well, yeah, throw all the ideas at me, Terry. I reckon we can do it. So we turned around and pitched that, and it was like a handful of pieces of paper. They're really, really shabby. But it'd be Firebird software back then. Turned around and said, yeah, we'd like that. So for the next 4 months, we all dived on and made it. And it was kind of, I started as being the lead coder on it on the Atari and Amiga, with Dave Pridmore doing the Z80 versions, Stu Gregg, my school friend, who'd given me the elbow to submit the game to Micropower years earlier, working with us. I just think Rob Toon, Bob Churchill worked on the design. Terry did all the background graphics. I did the sprite graphics. Yeah, let's think. Yeah, I think that's everybody covered, hopefully, and then a lot of support from everybody else. But yeah, we just sort of knuckled down and just cranked through for 4 months. Did it, and they say the story of the iconic was basically we needed some sound effects, and so me and Terry was kind of like, right, okay, then we'll get the tape recorder out, which is a little crappy condenser mic kind of tape recorder. And just sat there in the office in one afternoon after lunch, making ridiculous sounds into the tape recorder, and we just picked the one that was funniest, which was turned out to be mine. And so we put that in there, and it's followed me ever since. So yeah, Brick Dangerous. Switchblade eventually came out about 18 months later. Yeah, sort of like time-wise, it came out later, although I'd started it in my spare time whilst working from Gremlin, and I'd carried on working on it in my spare time all the way through. So the funny thing was, as I'd started Rick and completed Rick, my kind of game coding had leveled up, but it hadn't in Switchblade, although obviously I was kind of working through. So there was a certain point where I was a few months away from the end of finishing Switchblade, and I was like, some of this code is absolute junk. Now I've got a choice here. Do I go back and spend another year refactoring it and rewriting it, or just grind it out and get it to the end? And I was like, I want to see this done. So I grinded it out, because there was like all sorts of stuff. Like, I think, for an example, in Rick, I calculated a parabolic arc for his jump. So he actually simulated gravity and fell. In Switchblade, that was tabulated. So I'd actually were working through a table. There's all sorts of horrific things which are just totally, you're just making up as you go along kind of thing. And then as you go further in, you kind of do it. So yeah, and with Switchblade, it was that sort of thing of, hey, Jeremy, I've finished this game. What should we do with it? And you've got, well, I'd love to publish it, but we haven't got the funds. So it put me in touch with Ian Stewart of Gremlin, and we worked out a deal where Gremlin published it, and I then had another game coming out. Had the absolute pleasure. It was basically, I did the whole thing myself, with all the music and sound being done by Ben Dalglish. So I can remember, bless him, and say we lost him a few years ago, but I've got the real privilege of, I spent an afternoon with him up in his music room in Sheffield, and basically had a private concert with him, just going, how about this? Oh, I've got to play you that kind of thing, and just fingers going all over keyboards. I know nothing about music. It's one of the things that I've never been able to get my head around. And he was just like grinning at me and just like, right, now then this bit and all this kind of stuff. So that was a real treasured memory. So Switchblade. Then the next one was working from there was football games were really lucrative at that time. And so, of course, one of those kind of ones where, where you sort of saw what went into football games versus the work we were doing with platform games and stuff like that. And so Jeremy came to us and went, all right, I've got two options. One, Gremlin would like to do a beat 'em up kind of Streets of Rage style, featuring the Guardian Angels. If you can remember the 80s, they were kind of like a street patrol guys that wore little red berets that kind of protected people and things. Wanted to do a beat 'em up based on them. Or you can, in the same time, you can do 2 soccer-based games. And we're like, none of us, absolutely none of us know anything about soccer, have any interest in it at all. We've all got 20 left feet. No interest, but this is sort of like 2 of these are easy. Okay, then so we went in for them, and the first one came through, and it was St. and Greaves' football trivia quiz game, which was a kind of game of Trivial Pursuit that was that featured the licensed images of Ian St. John and Jimmy Greaves, 2 ex-footballers that had a Saturday afternoon television show on independent television where they commented on football. It was like the niche of the niche of the niche. It featured 2,000 really obscure football trivia questions, and it was as dull as dishwater, and we had to turn it into a game. So we jumped in. So we had 10 weeks to do this. I did all the art for it on all formats. We had a small team of, I think it was about 4 of us again, kind of thing. I was coding the Atari and Amiga. Dave Pridmore again on Z80 versions. I forget who else. And we just sort of like ground it out and made this thing. And the abiding thing I can remember, and we were just apologizing to him for ages, was Kevin Orban had to sit in the office and type in 2,000 football trivia questions by hand. And David come up with a way of compressing all of the questions down into sort of like 5-bit characters and stuff like this. So we had these little bit streams we were pulling through, because of course, where I got the Atari, I could just fill it. But something on the Spectrum, space was just such a premium. It was like, how do you compress all of this text down to really, really tiny things? Yeah. So we did St. Greaves, got that out. Actually, it went gold on June the 2nd, 1989. I can remember this with clarity at about 6 o'clock, because my then fiancée Jane was standing there going, "We're getting married in the morning. This better finish now so we can get off and get sorted. Otherwise, it ain't happening." And I was like, like this kind of thing. And for my wedding present for the from the guys at work was literally a copy of the box set of St. Greaves' football trivia quiz game, which was kind of one of those ones where at the wedding reception, and it was like all of a sudden the music stops. Now, I think it was Greg Holmes came up on the mic and like, "Right, Simons, come over here. We've got something for you for the wedding night." I was like, "Oh, right, okay. Prepare yourself to come back with the most hilarious kind of comeback." And he handed me this heavy box. I'm thinking, heck's in here? This kind of thing or whatever, expecting it to be something really, really weird. Pulls this wrapping off, and it was the copy from The Office. Is like, right, okay, thank you. I think I lived in my loft for about 15 years until I finally just went, why am I keeping hold of this? So it kind of was probably the last copy of that, last and only copy of St. Greaves. There we go.
I can pretty much guarantee that I will not know any of the answers to any of those trivia questions.
Yeah, I think there was. I think the only one that kind of like sticks in my mind, and I still don't know the answer to, and it was the default one in the first of the list, was "Who are the Shrimpers?" I think it may be Southampton. Your dear internet, please.
We're the Saints.
I'll tell you someone that probably would have probably does love this game is our ex panel member Dorbs.
Southend.
Yeah.
He
Dorbs
has a real affinity for trivia based games. He's a really he's like what does he go and do for work sometimes? He goes away, he does like all these quizzes for work and stuff. But this idea of there being a quirky football trivia game is just right up his street, and I'm half expecting I'm half expecting to get a message from him after he's watched this saying, "I've got this," and show me the box.
Fantastic. Absolutely. Well, say it was one of those kind of things that we did it in 10 weeks. I think Grand Slam, the entertainment who we were doing it for, I think they folded within about 5 minutes of us shipping it to it. I don't even think Core got all the money from that. There was something or other. I didn't really spend very much time looking at the business because it was not my company and stuff. It was just sort of turn up, make things, go home. Yeah, I think it was one of those kind of ones. I think we may have even lost money on it or whatever. But a second football game never came along. And the next thing we ended up doing was, Jeremy coming to me going, right, got 2 options. You do Judge Dredd for Virgin or Monty Python's Flying Circus, the computer game for Virgin. I was like, please give me Judge Dredd. I'm a real massive Judge Dredd fan. I'm into Star Wars 2000 AD. Get me Judge Dredd. I can absolutely know you got Monty Python. And spent 9 months making that beast of a game. The thing that I'm proud of it was actually kind of the artwork is actually I purposefully went and taught myself how to kind of get as close to Gilliam's style as possible for the game and everything. but it was really one of those kind of ones where you just go, why did anybody think of it? I suppose it was that time where everybody was buying up licenses for absolutely everything. And so that, they probably took a look at, you've done Rick Dangerous, a little cartoony kind of game. You can do the stuff. Yeah, there you go. That's my website with some of the sketches and stuff. So, you can go and do this. So, there's a little bunch of us got together. The thing was, I think Virgin wanted ideally either a Monkey Island LucasArts style adventure made by like 4 guys in Derby for nothing, or a host of like 1,000 mini games made by 4 guys in Derby, costing nothing, and would be having to load on a Spectrum. And it was like, no, we can't do either of those things. There's like time and memory and stuff like that. We could do some kind of weird platformy type game featuring some of the Python stuff. I remember Mr. Helly was a bit of an inspiration in the arcades and stuff. And so the premise from it was we took Gumby, which was the only character that all of the Pythons had all played in live action, turned him into a Gilliam-esque sprite, and ripped his head off and stuck it on the body of a bird and a fish and a spring, so you can get various different types of gameplay coming out of it. And the big thing I can remember was every time I used to go down to Virgin to talk to them about where the game was and where it was going. Oh, and by the way, one of the first things they actually said to us was, whatever you do, we don't want it to be like Rick Dangerous, which I think in hindsight meant, please don't take Rick Dangerous and fob us off with a graphical repaint, and that's it. So we spent the best part of the time trying to make a game that was not like the game that we'd made, and exploring all sorts of different directions with trying to make it more probably about kind of controlling. So when he's as a fish, you're kind of fighting. It's almost like kind of lander gameplay, but with the gravity in reverse, where you're trying to fight. Thank you very much. Trying to fight, anti-gravity as the fish is being dragged up, and loads of inertia and everything like that. And it just wasn't working. And so when I used to go down to Virgin, every meeting started with, so we're going to talk about the progress again, how are you going in this, that, and the other. So you know what, you should do the parrot sketch. Oh, what beautiful bird, beautiful plumage, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, saying more. Oh, this is a cheese shop. And so by the end of it, it was everybody reciting all of their favorite games, and most of the time suggesting you could do a mini game based on that. And it's like, we can do a game. I came up with a method for doing loads of cutout animations and stuff, which came in the game. There was the suggestion from them that you have a score that counts down from 9999999, so that's why it's got the reversing score. It just sort of like the idea that randomly it would cut to a cartoon or a piece, gave you that sort of fractured style that you had in the Python show. And one of the things that I'd done at the very start of the whole thing, and it was kind of a basis for everything, every license I worked on afterwards, was when I knew that we got Python, I basically got all of the VHSs, all of the Gilliam books and everything like that, and then took them home, and over the course of a weekend just sat there and absolutely mainlined Python with notes. So I'm just made note after note after note of like which tape, which episode, what time code, what the sketch was, what the characters were, made little tiny doodles and stuff like that. So that then I became kind of like a Pythonic expert, and then sort of did some stuff, which, to say, the sketches are on my site, of taking the characters that were in live action and then drawing them as close to a Gilliam style as I could possibly get. And so went in from there. So I think that by the end of it, there was like over 100 different Python references that were either from the sprites and the enemies, the backgrounds, or these ridiculous little animations that would just pop in. So there was that whole sort of like episode where there's identifying trees from quite a long way away. So on one of the levels, it would just stop and go, number 9, the larch, and then go back to the game. So it was kind of doing all that sort of stuff. And then the this was the time of lens lock protection system for the Spectrum, where you used to have that little tiny piece of Thank you. Where you had the little piece of cellophane that you had to put across the manual to do it. So we came up with the cheese lock system where you had to identify cheeses that were printed on the manuals. And then we did actually do one mini game, which was the argument sketch. So you end up having an argument against a tiny John Cleese from a sort of first-person perspective point of view, because that was really easy and quick to do and everything. But say we went on, and because we were just trying to find the game, the time just dripped away and everything, and we're all starting to tear our hair out because I'm coming back from these meetings in, I think it was Notting Hill where Virgin were at the time, and going, well, I think they want this and all that lot. They ended up talking a lot about the cheese shop and dead parrots and everything, but we've got to keep on going. And say, hats off to the lads on the team, their patience with me. I think they would all quite happily kill me at that point, because we were kind of getting to a point where it was just like, what is the game? Then I think, if I remember rightly, we had a change of producer on the project. We were about 7 or 8 months in. The kind of, at one point or other, there's like, could you kind of have a bit more of the kind of gameplay that you had in Rick Dangerous with the traps and things? You're like, what? You mean a conventional video game? Yes. Right. So I came back from London and went, right, guys, I know what we need. I know we've kind of gone through. Thank you very much, David. Let's I've got a bit of a plan. So I had a word with Greg Holmes. I said, this is really kind of thingy, but I said, I reckon I can do it. I know exactly what they want. Can I take the game home and work for the next 4 weeks on the game? So what I did was for a whole month, I worked 7 days a week. Basically built all of the graphics for all formats, did all of the level design, all of the gameplay, all of the animation triggering, and all of the animations for all of the cartoons. And then on a Monday, took the all of that data plus all of the sprites already cut for all of the formats. Said, right, guys, you implement this for the week. I will go away. And I did that for 4 weeks, and that got the levels all done. And we all just heaved a sigh of relief and saw it out of the door. And it was really exhausting. And say it was one of those kind of ones. It was this weird kind of time where you kind of felt really guilty for just grabbing hold of the project and going, right, I'm just going to have to just bullishly batter the way through this. But it got the job done, kind of thing. And say eternal patience and apologies to the lads on the team, because I must have sounded like a complete loon coming back going, well, we kind of know, but we don't know, but it could be this or whatever. And it was just one of those kind of ones where, as of that time, there are those games that you just think, people were, companies were buying up licenses left, right, and center, and then just turning them into a game. And it was one of those kind of ones. I remember there's the Rocky Horror Picture Show game. It was like, okay, sort of thing. And then like, could you get any more weird and obscure and more inappropriate for a video game of that era? Python. Yeah, I think you could probably do some incredible multimedia experience now, but or have one of those kind of like big PC titles that came in a big box and were worked on by a big American team of about 30 people. And you would have done it, but there's like 4 or 5 guys in Derby just scratching their heads and listening to people talk about parrot sketches.
I do find it interesting whenever we've talked to people that have worked on like games based on movies and things like that often you get like a script or something if you're lucky, or some screenshots or something, or told the premise. You don't actually get to, because the film's not been made yet and it's not been released, and you've got to try and make the game to come out around the same time as the film. And it's like, okay, how do you actually do that then? So how are we going to make it match a film that we have no idea what the film's going to look like when it's done?
That was Master of the Universe, kind of thing. And so and subsequently the Potters as well, actually, though, as we actually went through the Potters, we did the thing. So that takes us up to 1990. Did a Rick Dangerous 2, because Microprose came back to us and said, can we have I think Microprose had bought Firebird by that point, and they asked us to do Rick Dangerous 2. So we just got together, brought the gang back together, and did the same sort of thing, except for this one, we had 1,000,001 things we wanted to do with traps. So Dave Pridmore turned around and said, I've got an idea, kind of, we said, write down everything that you want to do. So it was this kind of thing of having traps that you could synchronize, things that you could start and restart and everything like that. And he just took his mega brain and came up with a way of doing this thing. And none of us understood the logic that he'd implied all the data. So what we actually did was we had like a period of a few weeks where each one of us, Dave would sit with us, and line by line, we would convert his Z80 into our target language, going, right, okay, then we'll use that for the X register, that for a Y register. What does that do? That increments a count, which does. And so we just like deciphered his black box, squirted all the data into it, and it worked, and nobody ever questioned it, but it was the most efficient way to do that. I say with Rick Dangerous 2 did a Flash Gordon kind of spoof, because it was kind of like, well, we've already done the Indiana Jones thing, so let's spoof another era of cinema and everything. And then say it is one of those kind of questions I get is like, what was Rick Dangerous 3 going to be? Because he goes into a teleporter and then vanishes. Don't know. Nobody asked us for Rick Dangerous 3, so it never really entered our heads. I always thought maybe you could do something, kind of. At that time, I'm thinking your next logical one would have been to do kind of the 1940s, 50s detective sort of stuff, maybe. But that was literally as far as the thought went. No idea how you do it or what you do. But nobody asked us, and we kind of moved on to other things. From then, it was my first touch with 3D, which was Thunderhawk on the Amiga and Atari ST. Had two incredible guys turn up, Sean Dunleavy and Mark Avery, who basically went, we've written a helicopter simulator on the Amiga, and it was incredible. Just absolutely for its time. So smooth. The visuals looked amazing. So I was kind of brought on board just to work with those guys, because I ended up doing bits of design work on lots of games at that point. And the thing that stuck it for me was playing something like, it was a Apache gunship by Microprose, was the fact that you'd sort of fly something. It'd take you about 5 minutes to work out how to switch on your helicopter. You get it lumbering into the air, and then you spent 45 minutes flying to a dot. Then it got to becoming a bigger dot. You might see it for a couple of frames as like a vector line. You pressed and fired another dot at it, and then that was it. You then flew back for another 45 minutes and landed it. And it was like what these guys had got was so incredible looking. It was like, can we cut out all of the boring bit and put you in the mission area? So that was kind of like my kind of contribution to it. And then sort of like the mission design and all the stuff around it kind of thing was of all the mission setup and everything. So, we punched you right into the action. You did all of the cool stuff, and then you flew out the mission area and you did it, which was quite a change for the things, and made the most of the 3D engine. One of the things as well, actually, a little piece of trivia on Thunderhawk, which to this day, I think is incredible. The code, whenever I've written code, I practically comment every line, because the way that my brain works, because I'm taking the time to comment it, it's making me think through, and then I can kind of pattern recognize all the stuff. For Thunderhawk, there were 2 comments: the 3D engine, and then about 25 pages later, the next bit, and then another 25 pages. Not a single comment in all of that code, which gives you an idea of how much brain power and genius behind that thing. So did a bit of that, and then next game for me was Wolfchild on the Amiga and Atari ST. That was into proper big kind of scrolling, inspired by Capcom and stuff. I'd been playing Strider on the Mega Drive at that point. I got a Japanese imported Mega Drive. I played the start out of Strider. It's like, oh, I want to do something like that. There's a weird kind of booming coming across my ears there. I don't know.
I don't know who that was, but
okay, no, serious. Like, what? They're coming from me. So I kind of wanted to do something like that. Bob Churchill, who was one of our designers in the office, he was massively into goth music and the Cult. He dressed like Ian Astbury from the Cult, long black hair with all the sort of floppy sleeves and all that. It was the like early 90s or whatever, like that kind of thing. And one of the things was he had this belt with the word Wolfchild on, embossed on the belt. And for some reason or other, that stuck in my mind. And I, taking the idea from Altered Beast of a character that can go through these stages, like, oh, if I have a mechanic where you keep the guy alive, he can stay in his wolf form. In his wolf form, he can fire bullets and things. In his human form, thank you very much, David. Sort of thing. And it was like, that's where that came from. And it was that point where I was I'd started doing so we all started, most of the games would start with just drawing the sprites and stuff. And I started building an editor and everything. And then somebody came to me and went, look, Simon, you can't do everything. You can't code and design and do all the art because games have just gotten too big. So can you kind of get somebody to help you? I was like, well, you've got better programmers than me, so I'll drop the programming and stay with the art and design. And so actually John Kirkland came and worked with John. I'd known he was my best mate at school during my A-levels years, and he'd come and join Core later on. And so John and I spent a good couple of years probably by the end of it working on Wolfchild. He did all the coding. I did the utilities programming and stuff like that. I dipped in and helped him with some of the scrollers and bits and pieces. But we worked together in office making Wolfchild. Did that for the Atari and the Amiga. The cool thing was actually it was the first one we'd actually worked on with a proper development system. There's a development system at that time called SNASM on the PC, where you could have a PC hooked up to it's like an Amiga, and you could stop it and pause it, interrogate the memory and everything like that. Every game up until that point I developed on an Atari ST, firing the code down the printer port blind into the Amiga, and then you just shot it down there. It worked or it didn't, and if something didn't work, you literally just commented out everything you put in and then just started uncommenting it until it broke. So kind of like whilst I'm in the office looking at like things like Shadow of the Beast and all these incredible games that used to do all this crazy copperless stuff, not only were we trying to optimize our work to make the Atari and the Amiga versions kind of like the least amount of difference to just be able to get them made fast. But there was just no way I would have in a million years been able to have just sort of like got my head around the hardware and do the stuff. So actually, when I started Wolfchild, it was like, I've got a PC. I can actually muck around with the copper list and freeze it and experiment and do all this cool stuff. And within a few weeks, like, can you give that to John, please? Because you can do the utilities and everything on the Atari. And so there we go. So yeah, did that. It came out on the ST and Amiga. And then at that point, one of the things that Core was doing was maximizing the use of the kind of the titles we'd done. So then, and I will just check because I've forgotten. Yeah, I ended up working on it on the Atari, the Amiga, Sega Mega CD, Sega Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, Game Gear, and Sega Master System. So that for the next 18 months. Yeah, it was published it was published between February 92 and May 93. And basically, after doing the two 68,000 versions, I then spent ages recoloring, rebuilding the sprites, making new maps exclusively for the Mega CD and stuff. The one mind blower was working on the SNES version, because the Nintendo had way more colors to play with and much better hardware than the Amiga comparably, in terms of being able to go, you can have so many colors in the background, so many colors in a sprite and all this kind of stuff. So spent a lot of time learning that adding color and detail to sprites is a real pain in the neck. And then one of my favorite games that I've ever worked on was working with Sean Dunleavy on the Game Gear and Master System conversion. Because we had this gigantic Amiga game that needed to kind of get into a tiny thimble of a machine. So we spent a good amount of time together optimizing everything, cutting every single corner to try and get all this thing into this tiny machine. And some of the stuff we were doing, I mean, but the most simple kind of thing was like kind of like you only had a limited number of characters that you could display on the screen. So going through the maps, and I'd written utilities to count how many characters we use. So you'd start with, this is my ideal, right? I need to strip, probably 50% of the graphics out of this. How can I do that? Well, replace all the least used ones with this. Anything that looks like an empty space, it is an empty space, and just cramming it down, flipping characters, rotating things and whatever. Then it came to like, we've got enemies and things that are this big on a Master System and Game Gear, which are used to throwing around sprites like a character size. So it was like, okay, we'll bake as many enemies into the background as possible and just like move their arms or whatever is just needed and delete them from the character map. Tremendous. I mean, me and Sean occasionally reminisce about it even to this day on Facebook. It's kind of like one of those kind of ones where it's like taking something so by the kind of thing so big and squidge it into this tiny little machine. Tremendous fun. So yeah, did that. Had a hand in working on Asterix the Power of the Gods. That was done by Stephen Walker and Richard Morton at the time. At that point, I think Core had already done an Asterix game, and I think Jer O'Carroll who did Heimdall had actually worked on that. I don't know whether Jed had. I think Jer had done all the artwork for it. But they moved on to doing whatever the next thing there was. My memory is really quite fuzzy at this one. But Steph came on to doing one of the things was that Sega went, kind of thing, we'd like some new ideas and stuff. So I was kind of pulled in to do that. I'd been a huge Asterix fan as a kid. I did probably about 7 or 8 of the books as a kid. Spent hours drawing little Asterixes and loved it. And so coming to this one was like, brilliant. I get to do this. So I ended up taking a line from what I'd done with Python, which was like, I can become the biggest fan. So I got like all 40 Asterix books and just sat there and read them all and went through making lists and stuff. And what the thing that Sega had said was, we want this game to be called Asterix and the Power of the Gods. Why? Don't know. But that sounded right for a title. So I actually found there is one line somewhere in one, I think it's Asterix and Caesar, where it's the line from Caesar is to defy Caesars, to defy the gods. I was like, right, that's it. So that's where we justified the use of the title for them retrospectively. And then the other thing about Asterix, if you know Asterix, the big kind of thing is Asterix takes a magic potion, which makes him super strong. So I scoured all of these books for ingredients and magic potions and kind of made a note of like all of these things because, this was kind of like, this was the canon. And so crafted and kind of like a multi-level adventure going across Europe, because in the start of every Asterix book, you've got a map of Europe showing where they're going. So we have a map selection. And then we take you on an adventure to all of these different places in search of ingredients for the magic potion. Eventually, you go and defeat Caesar. And then, of course, this had to be approved by Les Editions Albert René, which are Goscinny and Uzo's publisher. So submit the game design document, and in every single thing, it's like, I don't know, a feather. It appears in Asterix in Belgium, panel page so-and-so, panel so-and-so, or whatever. So there's no arguments that these weren't the genuine articles. And there was probably I think there's about 40 ingredients that were all magic potions that over the years have gone, we need to get a thing for the magic potion. So I kind of played that and sent that to them. Rich and Steph did all the hard work. But one of the other things actually with that game was, of course, you have kind of like, there's going to be a beginning and an end, and then there are various different quests that open up the next level. So you have to complete these to open this level, so you can get all these things. And by this time, I got enough kind of knowledge about cutting things out of games that what I actually did was I actually planned. There was kind of an indestructible, very, very minimal spine for the adventure, and then a load of redundant loops, and then a load of redundant loops on top of that. And I said to Rich and Steph, right, okay, build this bit in the middle first. They'll come and they'll ask to cut it. So we'll take the first set out. Then we know that you can then build this. And if we need to cut, we can take these pieces off. And that's exactly what happened, because you're always going to overrun. You're always going to want to do more. And so we could actually just surgically remove things from the game that never had to be there, never resulted in any wasted work. And so very pleased with that kind of like approach. And I took that forwards years later, in almost to the point of I would design that kind of way and not tell anybody that you could do that. Then what happens is you and I can remember this on Shadowman many years later. You have the meeting just after lunch where everybody sits around the table and goes, "Yeah, we're gonna have to cut X amount of time and this, that, and the other. Can you do it?" And you go, it's going to be a bit of a thing, but if you do this and do that and do that, and suddenly you're a hero. And it's like, yeah, I know we never get to that anyway. It was never going to go in, but it'd be nice to have had it. But all sort of thing or whatever. Yeah. So that was kind of a thing. And then say the Asterix went out, and one of the best sort of things was when a few months after it had come out, we got a fax through from Les Editions Albert René, and they premiered it at their Asterix convention and came back and written this lovely piece saying, this is like the most authentic Asterix game we've ever seen, and we're so pleased with it and everything like that. And it was like brilliant, sort of thing, because for me it got a special place in my heart, and to know that I'd actually been able to turn around and give the fans what they want and translate what Goscinny and Uderzo had put into the things into this format, sort of thing was great. And that's kind of a thing that I am more than passionate about with modern cinema and modern gaming now, because there are so many situations where you go, just do the thing, give the fans what they want.
Yeah.
You've been given this, cleverer people than you, George Lucas, J.K. Rowling, whomever, have made something incredible. People have fallen in love with it. You may have also. It's your job on their behalf to then recreate that feeling in the interactive space or in the movie space, and then bring it on to the fans and maybe surprise them along the way. And you will bring your own personality to it, but you deliver them what they want and you'll be fine. Rather than, this is my platform to do what I want.
No,
it's not Tolkien, not J.K. Rowling. You're not these guys. And I will get off my soapbox now. But
no, it's a good box to get on, and I think you don't see as many movie tie-in games now as you used to do. Whether that's just because the games industry has become bigger than the films industry now, so they almost don't need each other. But every now and then you do get a little gem. We've talked about it on various shows before, but for me, Alien Isolation was one of the prime examples of, I'm a fan, so service me. Don't be afraid of fan service. And they just nailed it with Alien Isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. I was like, hats off to the guys that did Hogwarts Legacy. Kind of thing. It's like having carried Potter for 6.5 years, and then seeing what they did with that, I was like, brilliant. That's all we ever wanted to give, in our capacity when we were making the Harry Potter games, and now you've smashed it. And say, I'm just playing I've got a Steam Deck, and I'm currently playing the first of the Jedi games, and it's like, this is Star Wars. I've just been piloting a walker having a chat with Saw Gerrera and going, do that in the movies or the TV shows.
I actually tend to prefer games which are not necessarily just based on a film or based on a series, but like set in that film's universe.
That world,
rather than playing through the plot of a film,
Absolutely.
I'd rather play like another story that takes place between the first film and the second film. Give me the game that sits in the middle, and then you've got that creative freedom to tell a story, but it
the Empire.
makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Bit janky, but loved every minute of it.
Yeah.
So that was Asterix the Battle of the Gods. Next one for me was Bubba and Styx, which was an hilarious year. Core employed a guy called Billy Allison, who was an absolute, such a lovely guy, so incredibly talented. He came in from Kids TV as an animator, and he and I shared an office together. And Billy's talent for animation and drawing is just amazing, and was always showing me bits and pieces of what to do. And I was kind of going, right, my drawing is rubbish. What do I need to do to improve? And he had so much patience, because I'm like, he's going, no, that's fine. I'm like, no. What would you do to make this better? Oh, well, I just fix this kind of thing. I learned so much about animation and drawing from Billy. It was kind of like, I've no formal art education apart from an O level, because all of my, it's all about this kind of, it was me and Billy kind of working together. He was doing some work on things like, I think he did work on some Curse of Enchantica. He did some intro stuff for Wonder Dog and things like that. And over the course of time, after Wolfchild, I was in a situation where Jeremy kept coming to me and saying, I think we should do kind of like an Indiana Jones type game. And I'm like, I've already done one of those. No, this one's different. This was the time of flashback. So what we do is we rotoscope all of the animations, and we have this guy. He's an adventurer, but he's got a stick. Right, okay. You can do all sorts of things with this stick. And I'm thinking, this basically is, Symes, do you want to run up and down the car park of Tradewind's house, mugging into a VHS tape, and then spend the next 12 months drawing over yourself, and then you'll be forever haunted by running animations of not a professional stuntman doing cool stunts, but you in a car park, sort of thing, running around the level. And also, the other question is, how does this stick work? Is it a stick that's this big? Is it a stick that's that big? Is it a pole vault? Nobody knows. And what do you do? Hey, I'm going to throw the stick. I've got to go fetch the stick. And it was just like, this is, no. Sort of thing. I don't want to go raiding tombs here or anything like this kind of thing. I want to do something different. So I managed to kind of just interesting and put it off, and it just kept coming back about the game with the man with the stick. And at one point I was like, Billy, he just keeps coming back with this idea of this man with a stick. What can we do? So we went back to my house one evening, and we just got this huge piece of paper, and we just started lampooning what you could do with a stick. And Billy and I just did all of these little cartoons of what you could do with a stick, if you were assuming the stick could be any length or whatever, and came up with just tons of these sketches, from like using it as a snorkel, bashing it over their head, using it as a baseball bat, poking it into holes, throwing it, coming back like a boomerang. Oh, levers, pole vaults, all of that sort of stuff, and with goofy little cartoon characters. And we kind of came back and went, it's not going to work, Jeremy, because like, here's all of the things you can do with a stick, but with a realistic character, you can only do like these three things, and we've got the problem of that kind of thing. Well, just make that then. And I'm like, okay, we've got to still make the man with a stick game, but like this goofy sort of. So the next year was me and Billy, John Kirkland and Mark Watson, just making the silliest platform game for the Amiga, Atari, and Sega titles you could possibly imagine. So Billy did all the sprite animations, I did all the backgrounds and the level design and whatever. And it was just leaning into the total lunacy of this guy with an alien stick, because he was an alien, he could fly back, he could do all sorts of various different things. And my abiding memory of that kind of year was just laughing our heads off, working till late in the evening, going across to the Shell garage, getting packets of shortcake biscuits and having cups of tea, and just being at points in absolute hysterics, because we were just in this pressure cooker of silliness for this whole year. And we kind of made this game about a man with a stick.
It's kind of a phrase that's coming into my mind for as you're describing that, is they don't make them like they used to, where you just I just can't imagine a team being quite like that anymore. There's so many arms. I mean, there are some good studios where there are sort of, you know, much smaller smaller teams, but this is what I love about that era of gaming, is just hearing how
that kind of thing. I think at that point Aladdin had just come out, so that had raised the bar for animation. And it was kind of the era of things like Toe Jam and Earl and stuff like that kind of thing, with just weird little kind of games. And so we leaned into it, and Billy's got, and always had and still has, this sense of kind of absurd, goofy, kind of like little alien characters and things. So we just went with it. So yeah, you have this character Bubba who gets carried off into an alien zoo and then goes on an adventure with a sentient stick.
It's just the best idea for anything, that is, when you say it out loud and just say it like it is. It's just, I love it. It's so cool.
From then on, I helped out with Dragonstone. The original guy who had started off on Dragonstone for Core, which is kind of like a original Zelda forced top-down perspective game. I think he left to go to work in the States, and of course at that point we had no internet, so it's not like you could work remotely. So he kind of left, and the game was kind of halfway done. So I jumped in there, mimicked his art style, helped Barry finish it off, and then because there was no storyline, also kind of crafted the storyline to the end. I literally cannot remember it. All I can remember from that one is me and Barry spending a load of time. Thank you, sir. Kind of like he was massively into anime, and so lending me loads of VHS tapes with things like Urusei Yatsura and Dominion Tank Police, and me coming in going, that was brilliant. On to the next one. I worked on Shell Shock at Core, which was the era when everybody was buying a Silicon Graphics workstation and saying, we will make the games better with a Silicon Graphics workstation. So they were blowing tens of thousands of pounds on these big blue boxes that were great for rendering 3D out, but none of the games could do 3D. So with Shell Shock, that was me basically taking the BC Racers sprite scaling engine and going, we can make a tank game out of this, and then crafting a kind of front end which was all kind of rendered, and using the using Wavefront to render out views of the tanks and things, and that sort of, that was me working without a programmer for the longest while, just building a load of content and going, right, there you go, that's a thing. And then that was kind of like Core done for me, and I moved up to Acclaim Studios Teesside, or Iguana Entertainment, which was up in Middlesbrough, Stockton-on-Tees, which started my many years of working from home. Working away from home, because at that point, I've always lived here in the centre of the country, in between Nottingham and Derby, and it made sense for my wife. And then we were thinking about having a family, although working at Core was so intense for me, it was like that was never going to happen. So I got the job up in Middlesbrough, which is where James from, 130 miles north of here, and worked for the next 5 years away during the week, Monday to Friday, and then 5:30 in the evening, knocking off and coming home. And it was the kind of first time in probably about 5 or 6 years that I actually had weekends off, because the latter part of Core was just insane. The amount of work that was put in. I've told the story before, but kind of like I was actually committing. Got to a point where I was having very, very dark thoughts about sort of like anything at all, because the pressure and stress was just so high. And I had a real case of kind of almost, nervous breakdown and anxiety and all that kind of stuff, which we now have got terms for here in the 21st century. But back then it was just stress. Growing up in the car park, kind of thing, because you're just burning the candle at every end possible, and then it's being stomped on. Not fun. So actually going up to Teesside, working with Darren and Jason Falkus, who founded it, and this lovely big sort of like family of coders and developers who, if we could have a meeting in the pub, we would do. It was an absolute delight. So I turned up there as they were just working on the third version of the NBA Jam games, because they'd just done NBA Jam for various different formats, and this was kind of the one that was based on the college games. I kind of came in there and they were like, well, are you an artist or a designer? I was like, well, echoing conversation I had before, you've got better artists than me, but I can do all the design stuff. That's what I've, kind of written to doing. So I took on that and became what was called a designer planner back then, which is kind of a project manager and designer. And so hit the ground running. College Slam was being developed on about 5 or 6 formats. And as Nick, who was my lead artist at the time, said, we all set out for America. Some of us are going to land in Mexico. Some of us are going to land, sort of thing in Canada. It's all kind of working, but we're all just diverging. So I spent a load of time on that, the first few weeks of that, going around all the various different rooms, talking to all the programmers, going, what do you think the game is? And compiled a single design document, which actually pulled in all the ideas and stuff like that, and then passed it out. And the sort of like the relief from everybody was like, I remember the phrase was like, they had this bracket mode, which is some term in American sports, which I still don't understand. But here you go. This is what it is. And kind of like, oh, thank goodness for that. So it was got this sort of thing. So I was just spending a lot of time getting guys called Martin to speak to guys called Steve, talking to guys called Dave to make sure that all the things were happening, kind of thing. And I actually coined at that point, there's the invisible Steve phenomenon, where you go and talk to, say, Mark, and you go, okay, Mark, so what's being worked on? You go, well, that guy over there. And you go to the other guy, and he go, no, that guy over there. And there was like this invisible programmer that was sat in the middle that was solving the problem that either one wasn't dealing with. That kind of stuff. So just bringing all those guys together. So pull that in. And, got that time. I joined, coming with me to Teesside was a guy named Guy Miller, who was creative director at Core. He'd previously worked on things like Battletoads and Killer Instinct and crikey, Blastozer, all sorts of stuff for Rare. Came to Core, and one of the things he and I hit it off, because I've been making fun games that were quite British provincial. He'd been thinking about big American toy type concepts and stuff like that, and I was like, hey, I like what you do. Can I learn from you? And he was like, I like what you do. Can you bring? So we kind of really hit it off. So when we left Core together, we kind of went up there. He did work on Frank Thomas's Big Hurt Baseball whilst I was finishing off the College Slam stuff. And then we kind of basically sat down with Darren and Jason. Well, look, you're at the moment Iguana Entertainment as was. They're kind of just sort of a conversion house for the Americans. Whatever the Americans don't want, they'll pass over and you'll just do it. And you've got really talented guys here that are capable of doing much, much more. And we've spent all our time developing big concepts either at Rare or original concepts at Core and pushing those. So we've got some ideas. So came up with some various different sort of pitches for games. There's a concept of Death Dogs, which was a kind of like a cartoon, kind of like a cartoony thing with big dogs with guns, which was just stupid. And then there was another game. Oh man, was kind of like all based on sort of like had it featured the detective Thomas Deacon, who was this kind of part cyborg who hunted down demons or something like that kind of thing. 3D adventure. So anyway, those ideas got pitched to the New York offices, and the New York offices were like, oh, we don't really want to do any of those, but we've just had a success with Turok Dinosaur Hunter on the N64. Would you be interested in taking one of the other Valiant comics that we've got the license to and do and make that into a game? So we got them. There was kind of like Bloodshot, Trinity Angels, a couple of the other ones and whatever. And then there was Shadow Man, which was like about 5 issues into its run. Had this amazing artwork by Ashley Rudd. Garth Ennis written the first few episodes, and it was just finding its feet and setting its kind of very sort of Sandman-esque in its way. You have this Mike Leroy, who had been killed by a voodoo priestess. She'd put this voodoo mask into his chest, which allowed him to walk our world during the day, but then pass over and become the Shadow Man in the world of the dead side. And apart from that, it didn't have very much else in there. couple of issues in, me and Guy were like, this is really cool. And Guy was like, the serial killer idea. And there was things like Seven just come out, and the Millennium series with Lance Henriksen. It was like, what if the serial killers got together in Deadside and wanted to come back? Like, ooh. So that kind of got us coming up with this idea of this huge tower based on the Tower of Babel from the Bruegel painting called the Asylum, where all the serial killers are coming through. And the original Zelda Link's Awakening. So actually, Shadow Man, as it became, is using kind of the structure and kind of mechanics ideas of something like Zelda, where you accumulate weapons which are also keys to unlock areas to re-enter. The collection of items like the stars in Mario 64 to unlock the way forward, and all of the weird, crazy serial killer stuff that we could throw at it and everything like that. I had an absolute blast building this kind of like this would be the first 3D adventure that I worked on. That's the artwork there. Occasionally I get written to by fans, and in the case of Rick Dangerous and then later Shadow Man, I've been, can I send you my box and get you to sign it? I was like, well, hang on a minute, maybe if I paint a cover and then I can send you a copy of that kind of thing. So I've done a couple of pieces like that kind of thing, where revisited old box art and version and stuff like that. So we made this giant adventure. It was tremendous fun, really, really creative stuff. And actually, one of the nice things was in the press, it actually got referred to by a few outlets as Zelda's evil twin. So I shall take that.
There you go. Yeah. That's very good.
Yeah, Shadow Man was great.
Yeah,
it still is great. It's got, it had everything I think I wanted from that particular era of gaming for me. Sort of having that horror element to things, and it's just had a recent remaster as well. I know that Limited Run have put out a fantastic copy, which is just emulating the old N64 box art and everything. So the fact that people are still talking about Shadow Man now and wanting these remasters, re-releases, that's a real testament to the game.
Yeah, but no, it was good. It was one of those kind of things that the first time I ever had to do any 3D level design, I started off with 3DS4 and spent an afternoon trying to build a spiral staircase, and thought, this is just going too slow. I need something else. So what I devised was a way of drawing architect's plans on a light box using a kind of a grid system and laying pieces of paper on top. So I created huge schematics for the levels, passed those on to the World guys. They built white box versions. We then fitted them all up with triggers and got it tested, and then they overlaid the artwork onto that. So I could then concentrate on, here's the all the puzzles and the swathe of the unlocking of the rooms and stuff, and design these levels that were designed to be re-entrant, so you could come back with objects from from later in the game and unlock further areas and stuff. So that was an interesting exercise, and I actually carried that sort of method of working forward all the way through the Potters. In fact, because they when it came to working on Harry Potter, it was like, we need a completely re-entrant Hogwarts that unlocks itself and opens up in the same sort of way. I did get to be the voice of Jack the Ripper in the intro, because we've got a guy was doing the script writing, and I put on my best Wolfskins as we were reading it, and it was like, Simon, you're hired. I'm like, okay. So I'm sat there with professional actors at some point or other doing this stuff. I did have fun doing some motion capture as well for that. So some of the serial killers, I did some of the motion capture reference for that, which was kind of weird because you can see your own motion even in a stick figure. It's strange how that kind of comes across. So yeah, it was really good fun to play around and touch all the stuff. And then at some point or other, we lost an animator, and so I ended up stepping in and doing all that kind of special effects sprites for that, which was cool. Shadow Man Second Coming, which was a sequel, which took the lore onto another place. And actually, we kind of the only thing that was kind of like about the second one was Acclaim by that point was kind of they'd lost a load of cash and were having to shut down places. We had a horrible time where we had to make a load of people redundant, and so myself and Guy looking at it going, how long's this place got to go? So we were kind of like probably about 12, 18 months into having done all the design for Shadow Man, the second one. And it was like, well, I think it's time to look out somewhere else. At that point as well, Darren and Jason, who founded the original studio, they'd gone on and moved on somewhere else. And I must admit, I have found that in everywhere I've worked, when the founders move, the place changes.
Yeah.
It's never the same sort of thing. So we took a look out, and anyway, Guy got a job at EA on Harry Potter, and within a few weeks was like, "Fine, I need a designer." So I went there, interviewed, and worked on the Potters then for from October 2000 till mid 2006. Interestingly, in this gigantic facility down in Chertsey in Surrey. If you ever seen the film Inception,
yes,
you remember the sequence where they're doing the impossible staircase.
Yes,
that was the lobby of the building that we were in, which means that whenever I watch that movie, I've been up that staircase. It does not do that, but it's freaky. But we're in this huge, huge building. It looked like this massive, I think it's like E-shaped building. It had this giant hangar doors that opened up over a lake, and it was kind of, there was a point where it was the first of two buildings that the second one never got built, but there was this giant facility, and kind of going from tiny little offices to core to working for an American company in Acclaim, but we were working in kind of, first time it was the 13th floor of a tower block above Middlesbrough Shopping Centre, and then out on the Tees Barrage at Stockton-on-Tees in a conventional sort of like in office industrial park kind of thing, and then walking into this custom facility for game making that had been landed in this by EA was quite a shock. I remember the first week sort of sat in this gigantic lecture room that they got, and we got all of the sort of like Bing Gordon and Bruce and Don Matrick had all come to review everything, and they were being savage over all the stuff that people were going. I was just like, holy moly, this is completely different. It took quite a while to adjust from it's just a handful of us in the office to like, you're now on the rocket ship that's the size of a super tanker. It's going that way, and in 2 years' time, your game has got to come out day in, day out, day in, day with the movie that's coming out, and it better be good. It's just like wow.
Such a big change from going from the early games you worked on and the different systems you were making, games like Master System and things like that, to all the way to PlayStation 2 and the jump in technology and the jump in how you're actually making the games has just been huge, isn't it?
It's one of those kind of things that's kind of like always energized me, and it's always even kind of like chatting with my buddy Alex, who founded Three Fields, kind of like the job, the trajectory of it, you are solving similar problems, but there's always something new to learn, some new techniques, some new technology. The fact that the technology is moving on and on and on, always, and kind of revealing new possibilities of crazy crap that you just could not imagine. I can remember sort of the time that Sonic the Hedgehog landed in the office, and it was just like, whoa, what have they put inside that cartridge? Magic? Because nothing in the world sounded or looked as spangly and sparkly as Sonic. And then you kind of move on you kind of get used to the 3D, and then something like Doom hits, and you're like, what? Sort of thing. And say the thing that kind of stuck in my mind is like, the thing that this last project we worked on, it's like you are literally discussing how many million blades of grass you want in the scene. It's just like, what? And it's like, hang on a minute. I think it was when I was at working on the Need for Speed stuff, and it was like, there is more data in this one wheel and its wheel nuts than the entire of my first about 16 games all combined, sort of thing. It's like,
I'm just sort of having a quick look at various sort of PS5 games I've sort of got over there, and I'm trying to think of something which is something that has that wow for like pretty much all modern games are still great. Like there's there's so many good stories, but I think the last game that I was like genuinely wowed by might be BioShock. And I just remember that first part with the plane crash, and then you come up and you just see the water effect for the first time, and it being like, oh my god, this is insane. This looks like water. This looks actual water. And like you're saying there about all the different technological jumps that you kind of get to, and you have these moments in gaming with things that you said like Doom, where you suddenly have the first realization of these things. And I'm sort of looking at various games and thinking, I can't think of the last time I had a game that really did that for me, where I thought, you know what, this is changing. And
yeah. No, it's a peculiar thing because of the trajectory of where we've gotten to. But one of the things that I kind of always try to hook into is remembering where we've come from in that kind of way of going, whoa, hang on a moment. This was the, having this little wizard running left and right and locked into a 2D thing. And now all of a sudden, oh my word, sort of thing where it is. But yeah, it's a peculiar kind of situation. And actually, I'm saying, although I'm now retired, it is that sort of thing of like, where are we going to go next with these with either AI tools or this kind of like, sort of AI rendering where you can turn around and give it a very low polygon scene and go, right, just fill in the rest for me. And things like that kind of thing, where you're kind of going to a point where it's, I mean, they look, looks wise, games look pretty good anyway, but where will that go? Again, at the end of the day, it's the gameplay that counts, as much as it is, sort of thing. For me, it's always, I'm rubbish at playing games, actually. I'm terrible at fighting bosses, and I've always preferred games where you kind of enter a world and then you just go off and it's a destination. So for me, it's kind of like I've rinsed all the Borderlands series, big fan of Fallout and all that kind of stuff, where you can just go, you know what, I'm not going to spend, kind of precious hours in this doom loop of being smashed by the same thing until I get lucky and get through. I'm going to come back with a big gun or an even bigger gun and then just obliterate them, sort of thing. And then in terms, certainly for my taste, is like, do you want to do you want to see cutscenes that are a sort of an approximation, at worst, done by puppets trying to emulate what Hollywood does best, or do you want to be there doing the thing? And so I always like the stuff that is lean on the cutscenes and just goes, there is a big yellow dot on the map. Go find it, kill something, come back, go find another yellow dot. That's kind of where I've gotten to.
I think with gaming now, I think it's now gotten to the point maybe where I think graphically it's just going to get better and better and better until it's just real life. And I think everyone's kind of expecting that. So for me, I think a lot of modern games that I can think of that have really like blown me away, it sort of seems to be more now, right, what's the best story we can tell? How can we engage you like you would at the cinema, but for 20 hours, 50 hours, 150 hours? How can we keep that engaging all the way through? And I think that's possibly where we're going, looking at things like, Cyberpunk and Last of Us, and just how incredibly captivating these games are for the characters, where
the one that actually got me was Fallout, the companion characters, Fallout 4. Met one of the characters, I could see exactly, and this is one of the things, is that making the things, you're always playing the game with an eye to how have they done the trick, how have they done it, whatever. I had such affection for the companion characters that came along that were basically a walking inventory and an extra gun, like the sort of like a satellite orb in a shooter for me. But the way that they'd written the handful of lines of dialogue, and the fact that the dialogue changed after you'd spent some time with them, I was really kind of bored. It was kind of playing in the tricks of my game. I was like, I'm going to miss hanging out with you when this game's finished, and I really feel affection for you, and I know exactly what you're doing, and it's really, really simple, but it's just enough I care more about you than I have done in the games that grab you by the ears and go, you're going to care about them because here's a 20-minute cutscene where they're going through some kind of personal crisis. Like, no, go to the other dot, till it, come back.
Yeah. No, exactly. No, a bit conscious of time, so I think it'd be best if we perhaps take a few questions. We have got quite a few questions in the chat, so I'll pick out some of the top ones. First, thank you so much for going through all of that. I know there's a few other games you've worked on as well, but you've had such a interesting career of stuff you've worked on. It's been great to hear about a lot of those, especially the Monty Python and the Asterix were particular highlights as well for me. But we'll come. Do a couple of questions before we sort of get towards the end. But if I pick out a few of these here. So I've got a question here from James from Muchmore. So you got, what was the best console system that was the nicest to work on, as in everything went smoothly? So was there a particular console that was nice to work on?
I mean, the best thing to work on, I think it has to probably be working for the past 10 years in Unreal. Because for the first time, you've actually got a tool set that works. There have been, you're either working on your own tools that you've cobbled together that are just good enough for the game, or you're in that sort of situation where you're working and the tech is, kind of like up until, because most of the time, up until the advent of things like Unreal, I think, this is the thing, isn't it? On the initial set of microcomputers and early consoles, you built all your utilities and the games were simple enough. Then things got complicated where you had to have the 3D engine and the custom set of tools. And so there was this huge lumbering thing where you're waiting for the latest engine. You had to have builds for the artist that had this kind of stuff. The editors were all cobbled together, and you're wrangling lots of complicated 3D data and trying to make it work. So I remember kind of like going through even like the Potters. The tools were ongoing as we went along. Also, I remember at EA there was always kind of initiatives for trying to build a big engine and whatever. And in my experience, you've got to build the tools on the game with the game in mind, because you can't just build this abstract kind of tool chain that's not going to apply to anybody, and nobody has the time to actually use. And yes, it would be a fantastic thing, but it'll never get there. For us, when we left and Three Fields started up, which would be 2013, the whole thing was, let's grab hold of Unreal Engine. It's there, it's free, it does all we need. It's got the physics, it's got the rendering, and that has been, the last sort of like 10 years and now 11 years just working kind of in bits and retirement for me has been kind of the best stuff, because you can actually do stuff. You're not working on things and stuff. So I think that's probably the thing. And in terms of you've got a whole world of other developers solving the same problems you are, so the tools actually work. And one of the things that we adopted with Three Fields was, okay, then if we can we've got some really smart programmers. If those guys can write a utility or a tool that will save we in the design and content creation stuff an amount of time, if it takes them an hour to write, but it saves us 3 days or however, it's worth doing. And so one of the things that with all of the games we've kind of like on our 7th game now as Three Fields, each one of the iterations that's gone on, and that's probably been thrilling, because it's been kind of like working in the old days where it's a small bunch of you all working together, but you've got these incredible tools to sort of play around with. So that probably, I think, actually is where I'm kind of spoiled, and I've just jumped out before Unreal 5. But
and this is quite good as well. So sort of a flip on that question. That's from Dave Newton Music, saying, graphics, sound, and tech aside, what was your favorite game to work on, and why?
I mean, I suppose Switchblade I loved because it was 100% me. just weird stuff from my head, multiple various different influences from Blade Runner to anime, and putting that in. I loved Wolf Child for the same reason. Me and John doing that kind of stuff together. Potter was thrilling because you get to, again, actually getting back on the soapbox, you get to represent this thing, and you're seeing it in the media, and it's a tremendous responsibility, but it's also really exciting because you're at the center of what was a cultural event at that time, and stuff. And then you say playing around with things like Need for Speed and all these kind of later titles where you're getting chance to blow stuff up, and there aren't those kind of limits or whatever. It's one of the ones actually, it was really kind of cool when I first joined Criterion, and kind of like touching on some of the stuff with Burnout, and we were looking towards Need for Speed. And it was actually with the Need for Speed game was one of the first times where we were building a system. So there was a traffic system, we never actually got to a train system, but you're kind of building systems, and then you're seeing how they interact, and you're putting gameplay in there rather than scripted events. I remember at that point talking to Craig, who was one of the was like the creative head of the game, and going, well, you could trigger a train off screen. He went, no. If we're going to do trains, we never actually did because we ran out of time. We'd just build a train system so that organically comes out of the thing, and that was like fantastic, because in the back of your mind when you're trying to make these games, you're always compromising and always dreaming there'd be a system where you could kind of have a world, and you could build these worlds, and you could build on top of them. And in fact, what you end up doing is building a little kind of corridor with a load of triggers and making stuff happen around you. That's interesting. Switchblade 2, I never had anything to do with Switchblade 2. I had first refusal on making a sequel. The first I heard that there was a sequel of Switchblade 2 was when I saw it in a magazine. So I went, I thought I had first refusal on this. It said in the guide. Okay, hang on a minute. Simon, would you like to make Switchblade 2? I was like, no, I haven't got time. Could we make one? Yes. Okay. So it was one of those kind of things of, what game did you not work on that I wish you had? Well, ones that I'm glad that I hadn't. So I never wanted to work on a Star Wars game, and I never wanted to work on a Batman game, because I love Star Wars and I love Batman. And the problem is working on Harry Potter, Asterix, James Bond, Monty Python, and all of these properties. It's like going to the ice cream factory and being told you can eat all the ice cream you can have. And then when you go, I'm going to go home, they go, no. We're locking the doors, and there's 20 trucks full of Chunky Monkey that you've got to finish before we'll even let you have a glass of water. And then you go, okay. And so now I want nothing to do with any of those titles. Maybe the Asterix. I'm still toying with the idea of buying the books again and stuff. So that's kind of my thing. So I'm really glad that I never got to work on a Batman and a Star Wars. What didn't work on that I wish I had. I think I've been, because of the way that I kind of, you're always looking back, and it's like there is a plan, but basically it was, how do I stay in the games industry and survive, say yes to any opportunity that comes up, and make the best of it. I've had this situation where I've touched so many things that, if somebody asked me the other day, what's the game that you'd really like to work on now if you were going to work on another one? I was like, I have done them all. I've done racing, I've done magic, I've done 3D, I've done 2D and stuff like that kind of thing. So, maybe once I've finished working on professional stuff, I might come along and tinker and make something of my own. But I've got no kind of I've been so privileged to have touched on all these things and gone from literally in the bedroom making crazy, goofy stuff to multi-million-dollar franchises, and then back down to sitting in here for kind of 10 years just making stuff through a screen and things. So there's nothing really, and I've even played around with VR, because we actually did shooting game. Was our second title. Came out of Three Fields for the PSVR headset and stuff like that. I can't even say I'd like to play with VR because I have. So no, I've been very, very fortunate and stuff. It's been cool.
Very cool. No, you've worked some really cool titles. So yeah, no, very, very tough. There's one more cheeky question I wanted to throw in there because I saw this in from Andy, and I thought this was a really interesting question. So, if you go back to with a piece of technology from today to the early 90s, what would you show your younger self or blow your mind?
Pretty much anything that I've got in my house. I've just got a new cleaning robot, and I was like, I have robots that clean my house. I have a black slab that I have got every single piece of information on earth. I can ask it a question in English and it will reply to me. I mean, say if I just turned up with my PC and switched on the editor that I work in now, sort of thing, even just Blender, it's just like, kind of thing. So any of that, I think probably if we went, because I suppose early 90s, you're still kind of thinking that I suppose that one of the interesting things about the early 90s, there was still a thinking that games would generally be 2D and 3D as being the de facto kind of like game format was not a thing. It was wireframes and kind of cool, and maybe you could have something like Battlezone that looked a bit more real, but actually all the games become 3D would be a kind of a thing. So I mean, it is that kind of thing. And I had lots of conversations with Alex over the years, just going, how far have we come? How far have we come? Sort of thing. Stuff. And I still try and, be very mindful of the fact that we have miracles around us. And as much as we go, social media and all this kind of stuff, and all of this stuff, this tech is weaponized to extract as much of our attention as possible out of us and things like that. There are so many incredible things that you can do communicating with people and sharing ideas and stuff. So it's really hard to say, but just anything that's on my desk or in my drawers here, sort of thing. My Steam Deck. If I come back and went, here you go, you can fly an X-Wing in a TV in the palm of your hand. Or Meta Quest and go, do you want to walk around Star Wars? Bang.
Yep.
Yes, please.
I saw quite a funny picture the other day, which was like a guy from the 80s with like a massive camcorder, a Walkman, a keyboard, like all this tech and everything. And it's like all of this now fits in your pocket. Like all of those different things he had in the picture. And I went through, I was like, actually, my phone could replicate all of those things and can probably do it better. So it is mad, isn't it? So thank you so much for your time. We've taken up a lot of your time this evening. Thank you so much for coming and talking to us. And I'm sure we could probably talk for another hour at least, going through stuff. It's been really good. So thank you for coming on. And thank you for everyone that's been watching. Thank you for you stuck with us all the way through. Don't forget to give us a like, and if you're new here, please consider subscribing, because we always like talking about games, and if you've enjoyed this, you'll enjoy the rest of the content on our channel. So please come and give us a subscribe. And for Simon, what's the best place to follow you and look at?
Well, if you, I've got my website, simonphipps.com, which has got various different links to my Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and things like that. I've got Twitter. Basically, I've got @SimonPhippsArt. I actually pulled them all together under one thing, so on the various different things, so look out there. And basically I've got multiple various different hobbies and stuff like that kind of thing, building props and costumes and drawing art and things like that. So just follow those. And I've got a goofy little project which you can find through at the moment, which I've been drawing a load of I'm kind of always been into street art, but never found a thing for it. And so I just decided at the beginning of the year, rather than doom scrolling on my phone, I've just started drawing lots and lots of ridiculous little tiny cartoons on pieces of artwork whilst I'm having coffees and things. So I've got like a thing
amazing.
The Simo Art Project, which I think you can probably find from my Twitter, and it's just basically I'll take along these little cards whilst I'm out drinking coffee with my wife, and instead of doom scrolling, end up with these all sorts of weird little kind of character sketches and stuff like that kind of thing. And I've gone completely analog with it, because as much as I'm using technological tools, I decided what I'm going to do is take them out into the wild and then photograph them in situ in various different sort of settings up against graffiti walls and stuff like that. So there is another Twitter you can find from my link somewhere or other that will take you to that sort of thing as kind of like an ongoing thing that I'm just posting to every week. And then I've got a YouTube where I've been doing some of my prop builds, because that was kind of like I'm building things like robots and stuff. And it's like, well, actually, I document what I'm doing. I've got a load of pictures and video. I thought I'll put them together and I've started building these kind of YouTubes. And then there's various different other things on my Instagram and stuff that I post up as I draw it and things like that. So, yeah. And, since I retired, I've kind of, wife and I just sort of said, look, let's try and say yes to as many opportunities as possible. So as a result, I've traveled more in this past year than I have in any other year of my life. And I'm having an absolute blast.
Oh, wow.
And meeting loads of people, been to a whole bunch of retro games museums and stuff, which has been terrific. And just only recently come back from an Amiga event in a small town of Spoleto in Italy, which was one of the most heartwarming and wonderful experiences I think I've had, and actually reminded me, exposed me to something that I never knew, and actually just as kind of like it, if you've got the time, just sort of say, sort of 30 years ago, sitting there making a game, you go, we've got 4 months and we're going to put this out and we're going to make it, and they're paying us money to make games. That's cool, and it goes on the mortgage, and I hope I don't get fired, and I hope the game comes out and people like it and all this kind of stuff. What I never realized, and I hope everybody who worked on a game gets to experience this at some point in their life, is that when you're making a game, you're actually putting joy out into the world. You're taking it and you're putting it out there, and you're giving it to people you'll never know, never meet, but you're entertaining them, creating memories and a time and space for them. And so I've been privileged enough, and this is giving me goosebumps just thinking about it, to have created fond memories for, coming home from school with your mates, putting a tape in and sitting around and passing the joystick around on sort of like summers or a Christmas and things like that kind of thing, which I hadn't realized the impact of until I went to Italy the other week, and I was meeting guys in their kind of 40s who were greeting me and embracing me like a brother and wanting to tell me their stories of the games that I'd made that had entertained them and played them. And the one that really kind of just did it for me was one guy. He'd lost his brother, and the way that he rekindled his memories of his brother was he bought an Amiga and got all the old tapes out there, all the old discs out the loft, and sat there and played them. For the time that he did, playing my games and that of the guys that had done it, was bringing his brother back to him. That just floored me. And all of a sudden, it has taken all of this sort of stuff, of this incredible privilege of being able to make this stuff, but realize how much joy we as game makers are putting out the world. And then to have all that flooding back and to be experiencing it, it's just amazing and something I never expected. And I am so grateful that I've realized. And that from just, putting a few pixels on the screen and making things run around and stuff like that. So there you go. That's kind of a moment that I'm not expected. And I want to carry that forwards through talking to guys like you and helping out. And also, actually, I'm now getting involved with the local college to work with students to give those guys a few pointers to head forwards. And so that's kind of where it all comes to be. And that's really, really cool. And so, thanks ever so much for having me here. Being able to share that with you.
It's our honor.
I think that's a really really good place to wrap things up. Saying that, I think it's one of those things where we love games, and one thing I love talking about games as well is as soon as you say, "Oh, have you played this?" and the other person's played it, boom, you've got a shared experience, and you've never met a person before and say, "Oh, do you know what? My favorite game is this. That's one of my favorite games," and all of a sudden you've now got a shared experience with the person that you spent no time with because you've had that experience of that game, and I just think it does bring people together in weird and wonderful ways, doesn't it? Really, so and it's ever evolving. But again, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you everyone for watching. It's been a really great evening. So thanks very much, everybody. And we'll be back again on Tuesday for Uncensored.
We will
come back and join us again. All right,
is that where I get saved?
Yes, the show where anything can happen. It will most likely be us talking about games.
Fabulous. You guys take care. Thanks everybody else for joining in the chat and everything. I'll be heading to various different. Thank you very much indeed, David. I'll be heading to some. I've been asked to do some various different events up and down the country. So if I'm follow me on Twitter. I'll post it. Come say hello. Thank you.
Yeah, you never know. We might see another event in the future because we do like our events as well. So
you guys take care.
Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.